You might be wondering what's going on, but please listen closely. Get out of here immediately. A doctor I had never spoken to before stopped me as I came to the hospital accompanying my mother. His face was filled with urgency as he pointed in a certain direction. I was shocked by what I saw there, feeling utter despair and astonishment. My name is Amy Parker. I'll be turning 37 this year and I'm still single. Right now, I'm living at my folks' place and working from home without ever leaving the house. When people hear this, they often say, "You're still living with your folks at your age," but I have my reasons. My mother, Susan, suffers from an illness that's affected her legs, making her life quite challenging. She's been in a wheelchair for over a decade. Because of her condition, I left my regular job and took on freelance work as an illustrator, which I can do from home. I take care of my mother while living at our family home and work from there to cover both our living expenses. I don't even have colleagues, let alone a lover. I often feel lonely about my surroundings. Fortunately, my work as an illustrator is well received and I get plenty of orders. However, as I go through them indifferently, I always feel this lingering emptiness. It seems like all my close friends from school days are living fulfilling lives, getting married, and having kids. Looking at the shining photos of my friends would often hurt, so I deleted social media apps a long time ago. When we do meet up after a long time, my friends are always talking about their husbands or their kids. Not being married and without kids, living just with my mother, I felt somewhat inferior. Whenever I'd get in touch with a friend, they'd ask, "What have you been up to?" I grew tired of that question and stopped positively contacting them. Over time, our connections faded, and now hardly anyone reaches out to me. It's completely my fault. It's not that I didn't want to break free from this situation and lead a better life. But ever since I lost my dad when I was little, it was only my mother, who took care of me all by herself. Considering her struggle, I felt it was my duty as her only daughter to be there for her. I kept telling myself that she had no one but me, and I had pretty much given up on a typical happy life. But then, one day, something unexpected happened, and my life started to change. I've always been told I have a serious personality. Born between a hardworking father and a flashy, fun-loving mother, I was their only child. My father passed away in an accident before I started kindergarten. My mother had been a stay-at-home mom until then, but took on the role of breadwinner afterward. That said, my father's life insurance paid out a significant amount, so she never really had to work outside. When I started elementary school, she remarried. She often mentioned how tough it was to raise me alone, and by that time, I think she had exhausted the life insurance money. My mother's new husband was a kind man, even though we weren't related by blood. He genuinely cared for me, and I grew fond of my stepfather and spent a lot of time playing with him. But it seems like my mom and I were just destined for hardships. The kind stepfather who came into my life fell ill and passed away. My stepfather is still in his 40s. The grief was unbearable and I resented the fate that made me lose a father twice in my life. Following his death, we received his life insurance, and I used that money to graduate from a junior college. After graduating from community college, my mother was against me leaving home. "Living in the city will be tough for you. Life ain't as sweet as you think." She'd say that over and over, trying to persuade me. But I was determined to move to the city. I wanted to become independent quickly to lessen her burden. I couldn't understand why she couldn't see that, and I even grew angry at her for constantly holding on to me. In the end, I compromised and gave up on going to New York. Instead, I started living on my own in Chicago, which was relatively close to my family home. I secured a job at a major sports goods company and started my own life without my mother's help. Living on my own for the first time had its challenges, but there were even more enjoyable moments. I found a lover, and my life seemed fulfilled, both personally and professionally. My lover at the time had a job that required frequent transfers, and my mother didn't like that, always saying you'd be better off breaking up sooner rather than later. Do you really want a life where you're constantly tossed around after marriage? She'd say, almost like a threat. Even though I understood her concerns, I felt that I should decide my life path on my own. Despite her repeated warnings, I was discussing marriage with my lover, and it was when she suddenly called me out of the blue. Actually, I've been diagnosed with a serious illness. It seems like I'm done for. The doctor said there's no cure.
You've got to be kidding me!
I exclaimed in shock and quickly decided to rush to see my mother. I don't remember when my real dad passed away because I was too young, but losing my stepfather was truly heartbreaking. Now, fearing the loss of my mother, I couldn't even stay calm while waiting for my return train. I grabbed just the essentials and hurried back to my family home in a rush. At that time, I was 27. When I visited the hospital, the doctor told me, "Your mother can't walk anymore due to disability in her legs." When I asked what happened, I was told it was some rare, unexplained disease, and I felt overwhelmed. I'm gonna need to live in a wheelchair from now on. I don't have a husband. I'm sure I won't be able to make it without you, Amy. I didn't know what to say when she told me that. I have a job and I've promised to marry my lover, and now I'm suddenly being asked to come home. I immediately contacted my lover and decided to put our marriage plans on hold for a bit. Thankfully, my lover, understanding the situation with my mother, stay with your mom and support her. I talked to my workplace about her situation and took a leave of absence to return home and start taking care of her, who now lives in a wheelchair. In the beginning, she was quite humble. However, as time went on, she began to subtly interfere with my relationship with my lover. Maybe I should head back to Chicago for a bit. I'll be right back. Maybe I can ask the helper to come by tomorrow? I can't neglect my boyfriend, so when I suggested this, my mother vehemently refused. My body hurts so much. While I can't walk and have no joys left, you're the only one having a good time. Her words, cutting deep into one's guilt, hurt my heart. This is how my mother always pleaded with me not to go back to Chicago. As long as I have Amy by my side, I'm happy, she'd say. Over and over, she would whisper these words, trying to keep me close. When I discussed returning to work after my leave of absence, my company initially offered telecommuting. But if I continued to only work remotely, it became uncomfortable at the office. In the end, I couldn't return, and I resigned after a year of leave. I had asked my lover to wait for a year, then two, but with my mother's situation, we couldn't see each other often. With fewer chances to see each other, I felt his affection for me fading away. Though I had mentally prepared myself deep down, he eventually told me he'd found someone else and we had to break up. During the time I was back home caring for my mother, he had fallen in love with a woman he met at work. He didn't want to cheat, so he planned to officially break up with me before pursuing her. As a parting shot, he said, "I really did intend to marry you," and I was left speechless. I cried all night, thinking how anything could be so cruel. All men are selfish. It's always the women who are left hurt. That's why it's not Amy's fault. Mom, if it's this painful, I never want to fall in love again. My mother compassionately comforted me in my heartbreak. Love and marriage aren't the only paths to happiness for a woman, you know? Even without a man by my side, I'm happy because I have you, my daughter. She mentioned she had remarried once for my sake, not because she wanted another man in her life. Hearing those words, I truly realized just how precious my mother is to me, more than anyone else in the world. I've come to believe that I can't really trust anyone else. As long as she has me, my mother often says she's content, even with her mobility issues, she's always hopeful about life. I decided to give up on the idea of marriage and went back to my forte, working as an illustrator. Given the care my mother required, I opted for a flexible freelance career. From the start, my illustrations were well received, and jobs poured in. Soon, I was earning more than enough to support us, and I felt truly relieved. I hardly ever left home, living a secluded life with just my mother. And like that, 10 years flew by, and before I knew it, I was 37 years old. Lately, I've been feeling off. I wonder what's wrong. Well, Amy, you're not as young as you used to be. Maybe it's just age catching up? Approaching my 40s, I've started to notice more health issues recently. I contemplate seeing a hospital with my mother every day. But one way or another, I've avoided doctors and just tried to get by with over-the-counter meds. Just as Mother said, I'm not young anymore. Many of my friends are deep into raising their kids, and I sometimes feel guilty for not having the same responsibilities. I haven't talked to anyone about this. Then, one day, my mother handed me a supplement she claims works wonders. You always take care of me, work, and manage the house. I wish I could be of some help to Amy too. Mom, thank you for everything you do for me. My mother seemed to always think of me and kept searching for well-reviewed supplements and health food products. The pills and capsules she handed me had an unfamiliar company name on them, but I wasn't particularly knowledgeable about them either. After starting to take them as Mother suggested, I felt as if my health was improving. Though, every once in a while, I'd suffer from stomachaches or dizziness, feelings I hadn't experienced before. When I started taking them, I was told that some side effects are common, so I continued as Mother advised. She said she was taking the same pills, so I figured they must be okay. With an unfounded confidence, I blamed my persistent poor health on aging and kept working. If I didn't have some struggles, people might think I have it easy in life. It was unbearable thinking that way, so I tried to convince myself that it was cooler to be seen as someone who endured hardships. At that time, I might have been intoxicated with the idea of single-handedly taking care of my mother. One day, I accompanied her regular checkup at the Central Hospital. Dr. Thompson was a kind-hearted physician who had been treating my mother since she first fell ill. This illness is tough to recover from, but we'll treat it to ensure it doesn't get worse. We hope for your continued support for many more years. While listening to Dr. Thompson, my mother had a big smile on her face the entire time. It was almost as if not getting better was a good thing. She'd be down after hearing it's not improving, so why could she smile? I shook my head, thinking to myself, that can't be right, my mother is a good person, and dismissed the fleeting thought. She probably was just happy to see Dr. Thompson, whom she'd been close with. It had been a 10-year relationship with Dr. Thompson. Both my mother and I trusted him very much. I felt the need to use the restroom, so after excusing myself, I left her side. When she goes to the examination room, there's always a nurse to look after her, so I'm not worried. As I came out of the restroom, I was suddenly addressed from behind. "Excuse me, are you Amy Parker?" a man asked, and I was taken aback. The man behind me was a doctor I had occasionally seen in the hospital but never spoken to. He introduced himself as Dr. Johnson and held out his hand before me. "I wanted to discuss something with you, Ms. Parker. If it's about my mother, I've already heard everything from Dr. Thompson." Dr. Johnson shook his head and said something quite unexpected. "What I want to talk about is not about your mother, but about you." I was a bit taken aback by his intense tone, but I thought I might as well hear him out. He led me to a prep room with a view of the examination waiting area from its window. Dr. Johnson said with a serious face, "I know this might seem sudden, but please hear me out. You need to get out of here, now." Confused by what was being said, I blinked in surprise. Dr. Johnson was pointing to the examination waiting area outside the window. There, I could see my mother in her examination gown. "If you don't leave right now, I can't guarantee your safety. You should leave home and hide somewhere, anywhere."
What are you talking about? Don't say such things. And what's happened to my mother?
I couldn't just accept such a sudden declaration. Feeling frightened by his bizarre words in this isolated space, I tried to leave the room. But Dr. Johnson stopped me, saying, "Just watch." Then, something unbelievable unfolded before my eyes. I exclaimed, "What the? You saw that, didn't you? I'm genuinely worried about you. Because I'm not your primary doctor, there are things I can see and understand."
But why would something like this happen?
I couldn't tear my gaze away from the glass window. A mixture of shock and anger surged through me, making my head spin. Must have been my blood pressure skyrocketing in the heat of the moment. I felt dizzy and almost collapsed right there. Dr. Johnson caught me and laid me down on a nearby examination bed. "It's strange, I've been feeling off for a while now. I've been taking the supplements my mother recommended every day." As I said this, holding my head with my hand, Dr. Johnson's face contorted as if he had realized something.
That might be something quite dangerous. To put it bluntly, it might not be just supplements, it might be harming your health. Why? They're all from my mother.
Dr. Johnson replied in a soft voice, "That's why it's dangerous." I was taken aback, but deep down, I had always felt something was off. The realization now made me break out in a cold sweat. I had always suspected those supplements were shady. But I took them only because my mother had recommended them.
Could it be she's now targeting your health?
Why would she target me? Faced with the scene before me, everything I once believed in now seemed terrifying. It felt like everything I had faith in was collapsing. "You need to get out of here now. Call me when you're safe," the doctor instructed, and I bolted out of the room without looking back. What I saw was clear as day. My mother was in the waiting room, smiling at the nurse who was pushing her wheelchair. "I'm feeling great today." The nurse replied with a smile, "It'd be great if you could start physical therapy soon." When the nurse left the room to prepare something, my mother looked around furtively and then stood up.
Pretending to be a patient forever is such a hassle. Wheelchairs are just inconvenient.
As she muttered to herself, she walked away from the wheelchair and stretched big time. That wasn't the movement of someone diagnosed with a leg problem. After Dr. Johnson's warning, I headed straight home. What was Mother thinking, deceiving me for 10 years? I wanted to believe it was some kind of mistake, but even after that, she was still wandering around the examination preparation room. If everything up to now was just an act, I can't possibly forgive her. Driven by anger, I packed my stuff and stormed out of the house. I boarded a train heading back to the town I used to live in. Throughout the journey, I kept getting constant calls from Mother, who had realized I was gone, but I ignored them all. I kept replaying the conversation I just had with Dr. Johnson in my head. From that room's window, Mother looked perfectly healthy. She walked around with no issues, and the moment she noticed someone was coming, she sat in a wheelchair and exaggeratedly stroked her leg. To my shock, Dr. Johnson said something horrifying. "I can't say for certain without checking the supplements and health food products your mother has been giving you, but there might be ingredients in them that are making you ill." After asking about my recent health issues and when I started taking the supplements, he looked deeply concerned.
That's crazy! Why would Mother do such a thing?
Perhaps, Mother got tired of pretending to be sick and now wants to make you ill. You're young, and the disability benefits would be high. When asked if anything unusual had happened around me, my hands began to shake. That's right, Mother and I had lost close family members in the past. One was my biological father and the other was Mother's second husband. Both died from illnesses, and each time, a substantial insurance payout was received by our household. Dr. Johnson's words were a shock to me, who had wanted to believe in Mother. Desperate, I sought refuge with a friend I was close with at my previous job. It was our first meeting in roughly 10 years, but I couldn't care less about that now.
What's gotten into you all of a sudden? Please, I can't go home for some reasons. I need a place to stay for a while.
I pleaded with my friend, and she let me stay at her place for a while. I promised to find a new place during that time, and she probably sensed something was up with me. "You can stay until you've got a solid plan for your new life," she said. While staying in my friend's room, I took some time to calm down and finally answered a call from my mother. Even after several days since I left home, the constant calls were unnerving. On the phone, of course, Mother was furious.
Amy, what's the meaning of this? Why did you suddenly leave me? My leg hurts and it's been tough for me.
No matter how much she yelled, I responded coldly with, "Really?" Not liking my attitude, Mother scolded me sternly.
You call yourself my daughter? After all I've done for you, is this how you repay me?
Looking back, my biological father and stepfather took better care of me than Mother ever did. My mother has always been wild, often going out at night, leaving me alone most of the time. Both my real father and stepfather loved me dearly but passed away too soon. Mother always said she cared for me, but she stood in the way of my happiness. Her words didn't make sense. Spending time with my friend made me realize how twisted my relationship with her was. I retort sharply. I snapped back, "Did your foot hurt? Weren't you walking just fine in the examination room on your own?" She probably didn't expect me to know about that day. Mother is silent for a while, then after a few seconds, she speaks in a flustered tone.
What? What are you talking about? You must have confused me with someone else.
And then she started again, "I can't live without Amy," sobbing to get her point across. But no matter how much she scolds me for being an ungrateful daughter, my resolve won't waver anymore. It's no use lying anymore. And those weird supplements and health food products you've been giving me, I gave them to Dr. Johnson. He's analyzing their ingredients now. The moment she realized I wasn't buying her story, Mother went hysterical. She ranted and raved, hurling insults, and shrieked at me in a piercing voice.
Who's this Dr. Johnson?
Amy, he's fooling you.
Haven't we always been close?
Mother always tries to push her own narrative without considering my feelings. It was the same when she opposed my marriage. Even when she manipulated me into giving up my job and my lover, she never once considered my opinion. She never once tried to listen to my opinion. Now I feel embarrassed that I believed I only had my mother. Why did I ever trust her? My mother was always all talk and neglected me. She was always chasing after men, parading around town in her flashy outfits. Maybe it's because she got sick and became vulnerable. Or maybe when she couldn't find a man to fool around with anymore, she kept me, her daughter, close by. It wasn't out of love, but because she was jealous of my happiness. She probably always tried to tie me down by her side, making sure her property didn't escape. You can't survive without me, can you?
Dumped by men, unable to hold down a decent job, and at your age, you surely can't find happiness. Shut up. It's all your fault things turned out this way. Don't pretend to be a caring mother and talk about my happiness. Faking illness to scam disability and welfare benefits? It's shocking, almost criminal.
I raised my voice and hung up the phone. There are a few more things to settle before I completely cut ties with Mother. A few days later, I received a call from the hospital on my smartphone. It was from Dr. Johnson. About that issue, we've finally figured it out. Please come to the hospital immediately. I jumped on the train and headed to the hospital where Dr. Johnson was waiting. In the examination room, Dr. Johnson began gravely. Amy, as we suspected, those supplements were harmful to your health. You were close to being bedridden or confined to a wheelchair. I want to go public with what my mother did to me and sue her. Is there any way I can? Dr. Johnson slowly nodded in response to my determined words. I'll testify too. There might be other doctors or nurses in the hospital willing to testify as well. Before I could feel relieved, the door behind me was suddenly flung open.
Stop filling my daughter's head with nonsense.
The anguished voice was that of my mother, who was in a wheelchair. Pushing her was Dr. Thompson. Yes, why didn't Dr. Thompson notice that Mother's legs were healed? As her primary doctor, He surely should have seen through her act. Mother continued to scream hysterically at Dr. Johnson. I ignored it and turned to Dr. Thompson. Doctor, what's the current state of my mother's legs? As always, Dr. Thompson replied with a calm smile. Well, nothing's changed. Your mother has been battling her illness for 10 years. Why are you, her daughter, blaming such a hard-working woman like her? The moment he heard that, Dr. Johnson looked terrified. Turns out, Dr. Johnson had always held Dr. Thompson in high regard. He had been working hard, following in the footsteps of him as a doctor. But one day, I noticed that Dr. Thompson's words and actions were becoming increasingly erratic. It seemed only Dr. Johnson had noticed this change, and it appeared he hadn't talked about it with anyone else. Dr. Thompson should know that Parker can walk. Dr. Thompson exaggeratedly spread his arms, acting like a movie actor. His gesture felt mocking, and it irked me. No, everyone's got it wrong. Only I am right. Parker's illness is severe, and his legs aren't healed. I'm gonna cure this mysterious illness. He then looked down at my mother with a stern face and spat out. After all the warnings not to walk, you went and did whatever you pleased. My mother pouted like a little girl, speaking in a playful tone. Well, I got tired of pretending to be sick. I wanted to switch with Amy quickly. At this, the pleasant expression on Dr. Thompson's face crumbled, and he began hurling harsh words at her. You've got a severe illness. I'm gonna cure you, and then present it at conferences. I'll become a renowned professor. I'm gonna use you to gain all the fame. Just shut up and listen to me. Dr. Johnson and I trembled before Dr. Thompson, who seemed consumed by his own power. Although Dr. Thompson and my mother were in cahoots, the doctor's behavior was clearly off. Even when she was yelled at, my mother didn't seem bothered and continued to voice her complaints to Dr. Thompson. You should have used something stronger than the medicine that shows symptoms slowly when mixed with supplements and health food products. Because you went about it in such a roundabout way, you got caught. Hearing this, Dr. Thompson's face turned beet red in anger. Before I could react to the shocking truth, Dr. Thompson's enraged shouts echoed throughout the examination room. You don't know nothing, you silly woman. Dumb people like you, with nothing in their heads but luring men, don't get to tell me what to do. But the very next moment, Dr. Thompson, probably due to high blood pressure, suddenly staggered and collapsed right there. Dr. Johnson calmly called a nurse over and began treating Dr. Thompson. Throughout this, I didn't exchange a single word with Mother, just bottling up my resentment and anger. To get straight to the point, my mother's legs had been healed for years. However, Dr. Thompson, who wanted to present it as a mysterious and rare disease at medical conferences, never let her get out of her wheelchair. Thinking of the disability benefits she'd get, she nonchalantly went along with it. But, naturally, playing sick for over a decade got old. She then tried to give me some shady pills, aiming to use me as her stand-in. Dr. Thompson was on board with this to an extent, but it seems he never intended to actually let my mother out of her wheelchair. He was going to keep her bound until the right moment for him to present his paper. Mother ended up dealing with the police due to disability benefit fraud. There are also suspicions that she may have murdered my biological father and stepfather for insurance money, and further investigations are underway. The police did visit Dr. Thompson, but he has been unconscious since his collapse. My mother still tries all kinds of things to get me to come to her, but I never listen. No matter how much she pleads, or how much she tries to win me over, I've decided in my heart never to go back to her. I don't want anything to do with someone who sees her daughter as a mere tool for convenience. I was saved from danger by Dr. Johnson, and because of that, we are currently dating. We're talking about hopefully getting married next year.